Okay, moving on with dry brushing. Objective of this little bit is to bring out all the highlights on this one, and we're going to go very, very lightly. So for this, I'm just using some acrylic paint. I've just got a neutral grey colour. It actually is neutral grey. Any medium grey colour is going to do it. I don't use white. Okay, we want to try and avoid using white where we can. White just gives you way too much, which is not what we want. Now, the brush that we're going to need for this, you want a brush that's fairly stiff. An older brush, not a detail point brush or anything like that. What we're essentially going to do is load this brush up with the paint. We want to use more the thicker style of paint that we can find in here, up around the lid, that sort of thing. We don't want a lot of fluid in the brush. We don't want to have a dry effect, hence the name. So we're going to actually load the brush up with a bit of this thickened paint. We're then going to try and remove as much of that thickened paint as we can out of the bristles. And we're going to lightly kiss the surface several times with the brush, just the tip of the brush, and it's going to pick up anything that's raised, all the raised details, so the latches, the door handles, anything that's sticking out, the corners of things particularly. It's a good way to bring out some detail. So I've already created the dip with the oil wash. Now we're going to create some highlight. So in the lid here, I'm just going to scrub my brush around. You wouldn't normally do this with brushes, but for this effect that we're going for and this style of brush, we can. Okay, now what I'm going to do is just draw that across my paper towel as much as I need to until I've removed nearly all that paint. Now I've loaded it right up into the brush, so it's going to be in there. You want to take as much of it out as you can, or it's just going to end up on the model where we don't want it to be, and instead of just picking up the raised detail, it's going to go everywhere we don't want. Now, a good way to test if your brush has got the right amount of paint on or not, get your thumb, drag it across very lightly across your fingerprints. If it's only picking up the raised ridge of your fingerprint, you're good to go. Okay, now that hasn't quite dried on that surface. It has on this side. Okay, we'll start here. So what we want to do now, again, is just in a downwards motion. We always want to go downwards again. In downwards motion where we can, is we just want to flick it across the surface, particularly around catches, latches, corners. You might have to come in sideways a little bit on some areas, some angles. Okay, if you want to get the main body there as well, you can. It's going to give you a little bit of a faded effect. And again, because we're using a vertical motion most of the time, it's going to give us those rain marks, those subtle little rain marks too that we want. Okay, we're going to get those corners, and we're even going to bring it down onto that grimy bit. Now it's really going to show up on that grime, more so than the blue. Bring it down into some of that running gear as well, just lightly across that running gear, because at the end of the day, it is grime. So it's formed a surface coating. And we might need to go up under that little lip there as well. We're going to get those corners, okay, and we're going to bring it down like this, down all those boards. Now, it may not pick up everything, and certainly there's limitations of what my little phone camera can pick up. Just here, there's a little row of bolts. I don't know if you can see it, but the dry brushing has picked them all up. These hinges and mechanisms at the top and bottom of the door. Sorry about that. It's picked up all those as well, which is what we want. We're also going to go a little bit sideways just so we can get into the corners on those door panels as well. Okay, we might need a little bit more of that paint. We might need to load him up again. And once again, get it all in there, scrub it around, and then take it all back out. Now, this can be a tedious step. I like it. I think it's a great way to bring out some raised detail. It's just one more step. Every little step you do can add a little bit more detail to your model. And really, this is all about some easy techniques to give you, a fairly decent result at the end. Alright, same across here. We're going to come across on a bit of an angle just so we can pick up those corners, those edges. but the last one we do is always the vertical. Get those buffers, get in around that detail. Some nice little louvers down the bottom there. We definitely want to get some of this onto those. Okay, remember the ends got quite dirty as well, so sometimes more so than the sides. So really get in there. That's good on those buffers particularly. All around the couplers. These are just the standard Hornby couplers that are on this little wagon that I've got. If you've got, you know, KD couplers or whatever it is you're using, you know, get in there, detail all those up as well. Come back with a bit more, we'll load up again. But you can see even when I'm removing the paint from the brush, it's thick, it's not runny, it's not the liquid part of the paint that we're using. We want to keep this brush relatively dry. And if we were to dip the brush straight into the paint, you're going to end up with too much liquid on your brush. So just a flicking motion, just lightly. And it doesn't have to be grey. You pick the colour you want. If you're using, you know, I know a lot of Armour modelers, if they're painting a tank olive drab, they might come back with a lightened olive drab as their dry brush. You wouldn't use a grey in that particular case. For what we're doing today though, on this particular wagon, this grey is going to suit us perfectly. It matches in with our grime. And if it is on some timber, well, sometimes it can give the effect of a bit of aging. So it's going to work for us today. Alright, let's board out the detail on those little louvers down the bottom and around those vents and those buffers particularly. One more side to go. Okay. So this is something you can work quite quickly at too. It dries very quickly because you're removing most of the paint anyway. And you generally keep one brush specifically aside for doing this sort of thing because you are rough on the brush, but this technique warrants it. If you know, if your bristles are sort of sticking out all over the place like that, don't worry. That will actually help because it'll catch other surfaces as well. With this particular technique, we're not being delicate. We're not being focusing on the detail really. Where we'd need a fine point brush. Come back and get all this running gear again down here. That'll just give us another up under there. Give us another level of detail there too. We'll get all these corners. It's a nice little latch in there. We'll grab him. And around those doors. Bit of wear and tear around the doors, around the corners. Alright, quite happy with that. That's helped to actually fade that paintwork in a little bit. Okay, so hopefully you can see now that you know it's picked up some raised areas, particularly around this grimy area down here. You know, it's worked really well against that. It's picked up all the corners on all the you know, all the wheel areas there, all the bits of steel that are around there. It's picked up the corners on all those. It's picked up the buffers. But you can also see it's gone on top of the grime, so you can still see our grime layer, and you can still see, you know, all that oil sitting in the recesses as well. So just one more technique that we can use to bring out the detail, particularly the raised detail in this case. Alright, like I said, less is more with this. Don't be scared to put it down. Leave it for a while, come back to it. You still feel it needs a little bit more, then by all means. But in most cases, I see a lot of people go too heavy on this, and I think in the past I've been guilty of doing that too. So yeah, just go lightly with this one. You can always come back and have a second go later. Alright, back in a minute.